September 15th, 1944. Peleliu. Lieutenant Yosuke Araki crouched low behind a jagged coral ridge, his face slick with sweat. The heat was monstrous, alive. It crawled over the island like a fever. Smoke coiled through the palm trees ahead, and through it he saw something impossible. An American Marine, helmet blackened by soot, rifle slung low, walked straight through a burst of fire, not around it. Through. His jacket smoldered. His eyes were blank. Araki whispered to his radio man, his voice cracking, "They don't stop. Even when they burn. They don't stop." Just hours ago, he had stood confidently in the underground command chamber, tracing Marine landing zones on a sand table. "We will slaughter them at the beaches," the captain had said. Araki had nodded. He believed it. Now, the beach was gone. The first trench line, gone. The tank traps, crushed beneath flame and steel. They had heard stories, all Japanese soldiers had, that American Marines were different, not like the Army, not like the airmen. They said the Marines didn't retreat. He thought it was just myth, propaganda. Then he saw one take 3 rounds and still leap into a pillbox with a satchel charge. Then another, bayoneting his way through a cave tunnel, whispering to himself like a monk. "Beasts," Araki muttered. His radio man looked up. "Sir?" He shook his head. "Not men. They fight like they're already dead." And yet, Araki didn't know something else. Not yet. This was only the first hour. They called it the Unbreakable Island. Peleliu, just 6 miles long, was nothing but coral, caves, and fire. A trap carved from stone by engineers who believed in death before dishonor. The Japanese 14th Infantry Division had turned the island into a labyrinth. Bunkers were buried into the ridgelines, invisible from the air. Artillery moved through tunnels. Each machine gun nest overlapped another. No blind spots, no mercy. Major General Kenjiro Murai stood before his officers with confidence in his voice and steel in his eyes. "No American will leave this place alive." They had studied every landing in the Pacific, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan. They knew the Marine pattern: soften with artillery, storm with tanks, push inland fast. Peleliu would shatter that pattern. There would be no glorious banzai charge, no futile suicide. This would be slow, calculated, surgical, a silent war beneath the ground. By September, the 10,000 Japanese defenders were invisible, hidden in coral caves, protected by steel hatches and interlocked kill zones. They had months to prepare. Plenty of water, stockpiles of food, grenades, mortars, machine guns positioned to cut any man in half who dared cross the beach. Above all, they had conviction. They believed in the Emperor's light. They believed the Americans were soft, that the Marines, despite their fire, were still just men. They had never met the 1st Marine Division. When the landing craft hit White Beach 1 and 2, Japanese gunners opened fire instantly. Sand and smoke filled the sky. But the first wave kept moving. They didn't run. They didn't even hesitate. A Japanese spotter shouted, "They're walking through machine gun fire." By noon, Japanese officers were stunned. The Marines had already reached the airfield, a position the Japanese had prepared to defend for weeks. Snipers reported strange tactics. Some Marines dragged wounded on makeshift sleds of palm fronds, never leaving a man behind. Others carried flamethrowers the size of barrels and wore grins. Corporal Hideo Matsumoto watched through binoculars as 3 Marines took a ridge held by a full platoon. He whispered to no one. They move like hunters, not soldiers. And for the first time in the war, the men of the Emperor began to doubt their terrain. It wasn't the coral. It wasn't the bunkers. It was the men coming through the smoke. The first sign wasn't a gunshot. It was silence. On the second night, Corporal Matsumoto listened from his foxhole and heard nothing. No shouting, no boots, no coughing. Only the wind through palms and the occasional clink of coral under pressure. He knew Americans made noise. Radios, engines, the clatter of canteens. But these Marines, moved like ghosts. A forward observation team vanished without a call. Later, their bodies were found in a cave. Each man had a bullet to the head. One had a playing card tucked in his mouth, the ace of spades. Matsumoto had never seen such a card before. In the southern ridge, a Japanese heavy machine gun nest, nicknamed Red Gate, was overrun. Not with grenades, not by tanks, by a single Marine with a pump shotgun. He whistled as he moved, a quiet, tuneless sound, like something a farmer might hum at sunset. The next day, their lines reported another loss. This time, the engineers inside Cave 14B were ambushed by Marines who had tunneled in from below. Like rats, one soldier spat. No, the sergeant corrected, like wolves. The stories spread fast. One squad claimed the Americans used machetes with names carved into the blades. Another swore they saw a Marine run back into a burning trench, just to drag out a corpse. They bury their dead, said Lieutenant Araki, almost to himself. Even under fire. His men asked what it meant. He didn't answer, because he didn't know. In his notebook, Araki scribbled 3 words that night. They don't hesitate. And when a Japanese sniper team intercepted a Marine radio call, they heard something chilling. A deep voice, calm and warm, speaking into the static. Keep moving. If you're breathing, you're fine. That was when Araki stopped believing this would be like Saipan or New Guinea. Something darker had landed on Peleliu. Not men, a force. On the morning of September 17th, the sun rose blood orange over Bloody Nose Ridge. By then, the Japanese had lost half their outer perimeter. But the real horror was just beginning. American flamethrower tanks, nicknamed Satan, began their crawl across the coral. They didn't move fast, they didn't need to. The moment one reached a bunker mouth, it breathed a liquid fire that screamed. The flames rolled like a wave, sucked into the caves by oxygen and hunger. Inside, men boiled alive. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. Through the fire, through the charred bodies and melting air, walked the Marines. Not all, just a few. But they came in fast, boots crunching on ash, bayonets lowered. They didn't shoot. They finished it, face to face. One Japanese machine gunner emptied 2 belts at a Marine charging uphill. He didn't fall. He dove into the nest and silenced it with a knife. In the command post, General Murai stared at the ridge through binoculars, then slowly lowered them. This isn't how men fight. Engineers reported their anti-tank mines were failing. The heat was melting the triggers. A radio operator near the airfield captured a line from American chatter. Tell HQ, Ridge is dinner, dessert's the beach. They laughed after saying it. That night, a Japanese sergeant broke discipline and fled. He was found weeping near the waterline. They're not tired, he sobbed. I watched them kill all day, and they smiled at each other, like it was nothing. Lieutenant Araki slapped him across the face. Get up! Die with honor! But as the man cowered, Araki felt something twist in his gut. Because deep down, he had seen it too. The Marines didn't just move through fire, they were fire. And now, it was everywhere. On the third day, Marines overran an ammunition tunnel, one the Japanese had never expected to lose. Inside, the bodies were still smoking. But what stunned the Japanese wasn't the fire. It was what the Americans left behind. Cans, shiny, cold, still wet with condensation. Coca-Cola. Private Keiji Nakamura picked one up, sniffed it, and recoiled. Sweet, fizzy. He didn't know what it was. Beside it, 3 green cartons of Lucky Strikes, a crumpled Hershey's wrapper, a photo of a girl in a swimsuit, holding a puppy. This was not the face of war, he understood. But the worst came later. Near the jungle edge, they captured a wounded Marine. Just 19. Bleeding from the leg. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He simply looked up and asked, "Did you get the guy with the shotgun? He owes me $5. The interpreter blinked. "Why are you laughing?" The Marine smiled through cracked lips. "Because it's Tuesday. I always laugh on Tuesdays." The Japanese medic stared, speechless. He had once believed Americans were cowards, machines, puppets of a soulless democracy. Now he wasn't sure what they were. Later that evening, Lieutenant Araki read a letter taken from the Marine's pocket. "Dad, tell Mom the Coca-Cola makes everything taste like metal. But we're okay. I've got good boots, and the guys are solid. P.S. They gave us ice cream again." Ice cream. On an island of blood. Araki looked out toward the ridgeline, smoke rising like incense. He whispered, "They come with fire and refreshment." Behind him, the sound of a flamethrower roared again. No prayers were said. No words could match the horror of a people who brought candy to a battlefield. It was war. But it smelled like chocolate and gasoline. The air was thick with rot and cordite. Every step forward sank the boots deeper into ash and bone. And yet, amid the wreckage, paper survived. After a failed American push near Umurburugol Mountain, a patrol of Japanese soldiers searched the fallen, looking for maps, coordinates, anything useful. What they found were letters. One was folded in a blood-stained wallet. It read, "Dear Lisa, sorry I missed your birthday again. Tell Jimmy I still carry his drawing in my helmet. He made me a superhero, remember?" Another, smudged by sweat and seawater, "Mom, I think I killed someone yesterday. Real close. I can't stop shaking, but the guys told me it means I'm alive." The men reading them went silent. Even the interpreter paused. These weren't just killers. They were sons. One letter ended with, "P.S. Tell the boys in the shop that flamethrower fuel smells like burnt toast." A Japanese corporal folded it carefully. He didn't know why. That night, Lieutenant Araki sat beside a pile of captured notes. He read them by candlelight, one after another, his hands trembling. Not from fear, from confusion. How could the same hands that wrote about dancing, barbecue, a bunker of men without flinching, how could they burn and still feel? The contradiction cracked something in him. He stared at the stone ceiling, listening to distant rifle pops. And for the first time, he envied them. Not their fire, not their weapons, but their humanity. They didn't scream slogans. They didn't bow to an emperor. They fought for each other, for the girl, the dog, the toast. And they would not stop. Even if their skin melted, they'd keep moving towards something bigger than orders. By day 6, the coral turned black. The caves, once dry and defensible, now reeked of rot and fear. Lieutenant Araki hadn't slept. His eyes were sunken. His throat cracked from dehydration. Still, he clutched his map with shaking hands. But the lines no longer meant anything, because the Americans had stopped following them. They came from beneath, from behind, from the smoke. Whole squads vanished. No radio, no screams, just silence, then fire. The unbreakable ridgeline collapsed in a single afternoon. Iraqi's captain stood staring at the collapsed tunnel mouth, then whispered, "They took in 6 hours what we spent 6 months to build." The officers didn't reply, not because they disagreed, but because they didn't know what to say. In one bunker, a Japanese runner found a sergeant slumped over a typewriter. Beside him, a note. "The Emperor's wind does not blow here, only fire and footsteps." Iraqi ordered the tunnel sealed, but no one moved. His men had stopped obeying, not out of defiance, but out of emptiness. They watched Marines march past their fallen, heads bowed slightly, never smiling, but never stopping. One Japanese gunner whispered, "They mourn, and then they kill again." The cave walls trembled with each explosion. Air grew thin. Some men tried to claw their way upward. Others sat silently, folding shirts, trimming fingernails, pretending they were still alive. At midnight, a Marine loudspeaker crackled near the ridge. A slow gravel voice spoke in Japanese. "We buried your brothers. We gave them water. We do not hate you." Then silence. No threat, no demand, just that. Iraqi covered his ears. He could take bullets, fire, blood, but not kindness. That's when it broke. He walked to the mouth of the command cave, stared into the black sky, and whispered, "Forgive me, Father. The divine wind is theirs now." No one stopped him. No one said a word. Because every man there knew the war had ended in their minds, long before the island did. By the second week, the Coral Island sounded like a foundry. Engines groaned. Crates thudded onto sand. Steel clanged against steel. But it wasn't the sound of battle anymore. It was the sound of replacement. The Americans were not rebuilding. They were reloading. From his observation slit, Lieutenant Iraqi saw a landing craft roll up with a bulldozer inside. The moment the gate dropped, it began to plow, not wait, not hesitate. In less than an hour, the Marines had a new road, cut straight through Coral. Behind it came water drums, fuel barrels, replacement tanks. Every piece fit. Every crate had a number. He saw a Marine toss a broken radio aside and snap a new one into place within seconds. Another handed his squad mate a belt of ammo with a laugh. "Hot and fresh from the boat, baby." It wasn't a military. It was a conveyor belt. Iraqi turned to his quartermaster. "How many spare barrels do we have for our machine guns?" The man didn't answer. He was staring, slack-jawed, at the beach below. A line of men were unloading pallets, talking, chewing, drinking coffee, while mortars fell less than 200 yards away. Behind them, a field hospital. Dozens of wounded laid out in rows. Nurses moved fast. No panic, no prayer, just stitching, wrapping, replacing. That word again, replace, not repair, not salvage, replace. Iraqi remembered a tunnel crew who died trying to fix a jammed mortar. 2 hours of labor, all lost. And here, a Marine snapped his rifle in half during a charge and simply picked another off a crate. It struck him like a knife. They don't conserve. They consume. The Americans were burning fuel like it was air, dropping shells like they grew on trees. It wasn't reckless. It was confident, a kind of wealth he'd never seen before. Wealth in parts, in energy, in people. And the deeper the Marines pushed, the faster the machine moved. as if the battlefield wasn't slowing them down, but fueling them. A Marine died in the open that morning. Sniper round, clean, quick. But what happened next stopped Iraqi cold. 3 more Marines sprinted into the fire to retrieve the body, not because of orders, not because of glory, because it was one of theirs. They dragged him back, shouting to each other by first name, not rank, not unit. That moment burned deeper than any flame. These men didn't fight for the emperor or for medals. They fought for each other. In a captured bunker, Iraqi found something stranger than any weapon, an operations manual, not tactical, not about shooting. It detailed supply chain modules, interchangeable vehicle parts, field assembly times. Every page screamed, replace, adapt, continue. The Marines were trained not just to obey, but to think, to improvise, to rebuild while moving. And they did. A fallen radio antenna was replaced with a broom handle. A machine gun mount rebuilt using scrap from a destroyed Jeep. It wasn't improvisation, it was doctrine. Later that night, Iraqi read another intercepted letter. They trained us to fix tanks with chewing gum, patch wounds with duct tape, and win with whatever's left. So far, it's working. A Japanese colonel, overhearing the quote, said flatly, "We built warriors. They built survivors." He was wrong. They weren't just surviving. They were winning. Because every Marine carried the fight, not just in his weapon, but in his will. And will couldn't be rationed. The Americans weren't smarter or stronger. They were freer. Free to joke under fire. Free to curse their orders. Free to protect each other, no matter what. The Emperor gave the Japanese honor, but freedom gave the Americans rage. Not the wild, screaming kind. The quiet kind that says, "You hurt my brother, now you deal with me." And on Peleliu, that kind of rage never ran out. The numbers arrived like thunder. 7,000 gallons of fuel used per day. A single American destroyer off the coast fired more shells in 1 hour than the entire Japanese garrison possessed. On a ridge of twisted palms, Lieutenant Iraqi stood over a fallen Marine, his backpack torn open. Inside was a chocolate bar, a photo, and a typed supply card. Each item had a replacement code. The Marines were not men. They were inventory. Below the ridgeline, engineers watched as another wave of crates came ashore. Each marked with location codes, weight, and unit destination. No confusion, no delay. One Japanese officer stared, then muttered, "This is not war. This is industry, with a soul." The Peleliu defenders had once believed they could outlast the Americans. But now the truth screamed from every crate. This wasn't about courage or tactics. It was math. One Marine squad burned 10,000 rounds in a single day, just covering a trench. They still had more. American aircraft overhead didn't conserve bombs. They dropped patterns. "Grid C7, barked the radio. "Flatten it." And it flattened. Iraqi scribbled numbers in his journal. Shells, gallons, calories, ice. He stopped halfway, because it didn't matter anymore. A captured logistics map showed the entire operation, weeks of supplies, color-coded, drop-point precision. His tunnels took 5 months to carve. The Marines breached them in 5 hours, not with genius, not with miracles, but with surplus. A captured Marine diary read, "We lose rifles, they send more. We lose tanks, they send more. We lose men, they send more." The Japanese had honor. The Americans had options. By the time the last machine gun overheated, Iraqi understood the real battle wasn't for Peleliu. It was for time. And the Americans had factories for that too. In the final hours, a Japanese general radioed Tokyo. They used fire like paint, brushed across the island. We lost before the first landing. Tokyo never responded, because in their hearts, they already knew. Tokyo, 1962. The cafe was small, tucked between silent alleys where laundry swayed like paper ghosts. Lieutenant Yosuke Araki, now retired, now slower, sat across from an American. The Marine's name was John. Thick hands, warm eyes, a limp in his left leg. They shared a cigarette. Not a word for several minutes. Then John said, "You guys dug in deep." Araki nodded. The smoke curled between them. "We thought we could outlast you." John took a long drag. "Yeah, we thought that too." Araki looked down. His hands still trembled sometimes, especially when it rained. "You weren't like the others," he said. "You didn't stop. You didn't break." John chuckled, low and tired. "We were just kids, with good boots and good friends." Araki's eyes burned, not from smoke, from memory. He saw the fire again, the trench, the singing man with the shotgun, and the letter that smelled like gasoline and bubblegum. "They told us you were beasts," he whispered. "Demons wrapped in steel." John's smile faded. "We were just scared. Scared enough to move forward." The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. Araki reached into his coat, pulled out a crumpled letter, still creased from that night on Peleliu. He passed it across the table. John unfolded it, read it slowly. His eyes glistened. "My dad's handwriting," he murmured. "I never saw this one." For a moment, neither war, nor memory, nor ideology mattered. Just two old soldiers, one who had feared the fire, and one who had carried it. As they stood to leave, Araki bowed deeply. "I learned something on that island," he said. "Defeat is not always shameful. Sometimes it's education." John returned the bow, his voice steady. "And sometimes fear just means you finally saw clearly." They shook hands. And as they walked away, past the children playing, past the sun-washed walls, Araki whispered to himself, "They weren't beasts. They were Americans.